Good morning. It is Sunday, May the 8th. Thank God it's Sunday. And this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have a clip of Cary Lake, who is a governor, person running for the office of governor in Arizona, in the state of Arizona. There's a clip of her, a short clip of her interview, it was the, it was a little short interview, and I got some commentary on that. But anyways, a clip of Cary Lake, no free lunch, The Collapse of Parenting, and a new book that we're going to be reading, and that is by Louis L'Amour, and it is called Hondo. All that and more when I get back. Thank you. And now the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for May the 8th. I have loosed the hounds of heaven against Jezebel. My child, do not fear the evil powers of the spirit of Jezebel, for I have loosed the hounds of heaven against her, just as I raised my faithful servant Jehu to bring destruction to evil Queen Jezebel. So I have given you the power to destroy the power of the spirits of Jezebel from your life. Because of my power at work in you, you will rebuke and bind the spirits of witchcraft, lust, seduction, intimidation, idolatry, and whoredom, which are connected to this evil spirit. Arise in the spirit of Jehu and use my power to defeat the evil Jezebel spirits from your life and the lives of your loved ones. 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 23, 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. Prayer declaration. Father, I take command over the spirits of witchcraft that are at work through the evil spirit of Jezebel, and I rebuke it from my life. I will not fear the evil plans of the Jezebel spirit to entrap me or the members of my family with the bondage of witchcraft in any form. Greater is the power of my God within me than the evil intents and schemes of the devil and his spirits of Jezebel. Amen. And that was the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for May the 8th. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded and asks why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Thank you, thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Bring back the admiration of intelligence, morality, and beauty. Bring back single-income households, integration, parenting, the primacy of existence, certainty of knowledge, and universal rights and wrongs. Bring back principled behavior, masculinity, and femininity. Bring back Adam 12, John F. Kennedy, the gold standard, pre-HMO medical care, and non-profit news. Bring back civil service, the term stupid question, arguments and fights, the cultural influence of the church and the Boy Scouts. Bring back the influence of social organizations such as the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. Bring back bowling. Thank you, thank you. Philosophy. As Ayn Rand noted, everything we do is rooted in philosophy. The foundation of our philosophical thinking is the benevolent universe premise. True conservatives know, by the evidence of their senses and the use of their mind, the reality that the universe is benevolent and that success is to be expected. The left pretends that the universe is malevolent and that the failure is to be expected. Furthermore, true conservatives know that if a tree in a forest falls and no one was around to hear it, it still made a sound, that all knowledge is acquired and not innate, and that all moral standards and standards of beauty are universal. Thank you, thank you. Politics. All politics comes down to one thing: change. Whether or not to change, how, when, where, and why. All political positions, therefore, relate to one's position on change. The people that make the presumption for change are on the political left, and those who make the presumption for the status quo are on the political right. Everyone who makes the presumption for change is looking, ultimately, for a perfect society. Everyone who makes the presumption for the status quo accepts the imperfectibility of society and agrees to change only when there is an obvious case for change. The true conservative, and only the true conservative, is on the right. Everyone else is on the left. There is no middle and no neutral. The cafeteria is closed. Thank you, thank you. Government. All governments are about securing rights. In the case of tyrannical governments, the rights of the government. In the case of democracies and republics, the rights of the individual. It's one or the other, not both. Any civilization that divides rights between the individual and the government will not remain civilized for very long. The society will become paralyzed and vulnerable to threats from within and without. See Rome. This is a constitutional republic, and therefore all rights rest with the people and not the government. In a constitutional republic or a democracy, activist government is contradictory and illegal. Activist government presumes a government that has rights: the right to arrest, prosecution, conviction, and incarceration. This flies in the face of an individual's rights: Miranda, habeas corpus, the presumption of innocence, and just punishment. The government has no rights.
Do you think Joe Biden is the current president?
Well, he's obviously sitting in the White House. Do you think he's the president?
I'm asking you, but I'm just wondering, do you think that if the 2020 election was stolen, is Joe Biden the president?
Do you think the election was stolen?
I have no comment.
Do you think that Joe Biden garnered 81 million votes? Do you think the elections were fair? The problem is that the American people don't have all the answers because the media is part of the problem. Media's not reporting it. Media's never reported our forensic audit fairly. They're not reporting what's happening in Georgia. They're not reporting on these ballot traffickers that are being paid to drop off ballots. Media is doing a huge disservice to this country. And the people aren't getting the full story. But eventually I do think they will. And the media, whose numbers are dropping like a rock, are going to continue to drop. And pretty soon nobody will be watching. Because the media has turned their back on the people of America and not been honest. ABC News, CNN, MSNBC spent more than 3 years lying to the American people, saying that Russia colluded with Donald J. Trump to steal an election in 2016. And they knew that was false. They knew they were peddling lies, and they did nothing to stop it. It was a complete hoax, and it was a lie. And now they're doing the opposite. We have evidence of corruption in our election, and they refuse to cover it. They refuse to be honest with the people of this country. It is disgusting what the media has done. And I think their days are numbered when it comes to surviving all of this. The business, when you're lying to the people and you're in media, it's a bad business model.
Do you...
So I wanted to go ahead and have a comment here and about the way that she handled herself here. First of all, she didn't just go along with the program, the question. The question itself was stupid. Do you think that Joe Biden is president is like asking her, is today Tuesday? Is this the month of May? That kind of thing. It's a stupid question. The left has gotten rid of the stupid question. So now people are afraid to come out and say, no, that's a stupid question. I'm not going to answer it. But in this particular case, Ms. Lake would have every right to say, I'm sorry, that's a stupid question. If you want to ask me something serious, I'll answer that, but I'm not going to answer stupid questions. Even better, what you need to do here, because Ms. Lake is making the error of listening to what the reporter is saying or asking, rather than asking herself, what is she doing? You got to always, when you're dealing with the left or anybody else really for that matter, ask, what are they doing? Not what are they saying? And when you ask yourself, what are they doing in this particular situation, you'll realize that what this woman is trying to do is engage her, this reporter is trying to engage Miss Lake in a debate, but pretend that this is an interview. This is a common technique or tactic by the press, the left, press on the left in particular, but press people on the right, Fox News and people like that use it as well. You go into it and basically, you're trying to engage the politician becomes an opponent, and you're trying to engage this opponent in a debate, but you can't make it sound like a debate because then, of course, it gives away that you're biased, you're not neutral, and you take the risk of losing market share, et cetera, et cetera. So what you do then is you make sure you phrase everything in the form of a question instead of a statement. So what she can do, Miss Lake could do here is say, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to engage you in a debate. And that's what you're trying to do here. You confront her, in other words. Simply confront her and say, you're trying to engage me in a debate under the guise of an interview. I will not participate in that. If you want to ask legitimate questions about policy, for instance, if you want to ask whether or not I agree with the decisions or statements that President Biden has made, then I'll go ahead and answer those. But these kinds of questions are clearly meant to be provocative, and I'm not going to bother with them. Something to that effect. But but she's on the right track in that she doesn't just go along with the question and let the reporter set the tone, so to speak, for the conversation. She resists. She provides some resistance to her. It's just she could be better about how she goes about providing that resistance. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from the book, There's No Free Lunch. Quote, when the government makes loans or subsidies to business, what it does is to tax successful private business in order to support unsuccessful private business, unquote. Henry Hazlitt. We must never forget that the mere existence of a benefit the government gives to some favored actor must first be taken from some other. The government does not have a subsidy tree or a crony tree from which they can pick fruit and hand out at their discretion. The government's picking of winners and losers is not an active help to those they want, but neutral to the other party. There is an active move to help one and an active move to hurt the other. And that is, there's no free lunch. Thank you. Now, onto the book, The Collapse of Parenting by Dr. Sachs, and there's a chapter that's dealing with teaching kids humility. This is the section of the book that deals with solutions to the problems of the collapse of parenting. So how should you deal with your kids? And this first of these chapters in the second part is about humility. I've known Beth Frayard, her husband, Jeff Jones, and their children for more than 20 years. Beth and her husband are just right parents, in my judgment. A judgment was based on many years of observation in my role as both their family physician and their neighbor. Beth and Jeff are both strict and loving, and they are keen observers with real insight into what has happened in American culture, at least in suburban Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C., where I practiced for more than 18 years. I met with Beth and her oldest daughter, Grace, who was born in 1989, to ask their thoughts about some of the issues I raise in this book. Grace told me, my parents taught me early on that I wasn't going to be the cool kid, and I didn't mind that much because what really mattered to me most was not what the other kids thought about me. What mattered to me most was what my parents thought about me. Beth chimed in. For an American girl to be cool nowadays means dressing in a provocative and inappropriate way, disrespecting your parents, and staying out late at night, none of which my girls were allowed to do. I asked Beth what her policy was about her kids doing chores. She explained that her kids started helping around the house at the age of 4 or even younger. Even as toddlers, they helped us. Dusting, for example. I would say, watch what I do. This will be your job. So that by the age of 4, they can really help with the dusting. There's no great mystery to this. What do other parents in the neighborhood think of your approach, I asked. Most of them don't approve, she said bluntly. Here's something that just happened recently. After my son's game, the other parents wanted all the kids to go out for pizza together. I said, no, we can't go out for pizza because we have to go home and clean the house, clean the chicken coop. The Fayard-Jones family has been raising chickens for many years, mostly for the eggs, which they eat. They currently have 12 chickens. The other parents said, oh, come on, Beth, are you going to keep him from his friends? Don't you think you're being a little extreme? But these chores have to be done. The game was his leisure time. Different parents will differ on best practice here. Even some just right parents might think that Beth is being too strict in this situation. But I think Beth is teaching her kids an important lesson. The world doesn't revolve around you. You are a member of this family with obligations to this family, and those obligations are paramount. The actor Denzel Washington tells a story that illustrates his point. I remember coming home one time feeling full of myself and talking, did you imagine all this? I mean, I'm a star, he said. My mom said, first of all, you don't know how many people have been praying for you and for how long. So then she told me to get the bucket and the squeegee and clean the windows. And that is an excellent point there. about teaching your kids humility. Now, one of the most important parts here that he kind of glosses over is peer pressure. You'll notice that the parents who they, for whatever reason, feel it's okay to get involved in how this lady, Beth, I guess is her name, raises her children. It's none of their business. You know, when I was growing up, if a parent said, well, Ron can't do this, go along with you guys, maybe because I'm being punished, or maybe I've got chores to do, or I've got homework to do, or whatever. And they say, no, Ron can't come. He's got other things to do. Nobody would put up a fuss. Nobody would dare say, oh, don't you think you're being too tough, or you're too extreme, or something? No. They didn't bother with that. If my parents said, I'm not going, that's it. And nobody would question it. But here you have the situation where a parent is challenging and probably doing it right in front of the child. Aren't you being too tough? Blah, blah, blah. Undermining the parent's authority right in front of the child. Now, the best way to handle this is especially when they were to use the word extreme. They don't want to use the word right or wrong unless they absolutely have to. So they use another word instead, and that's extreme. So extreme is also a trigger word. It gets you to start trying to prove to them that you're not extreme, which is impossible to do. What you need to do instead is get them to prove to you that you are extreme. So you could start with a question like, gee, I hadn't thought of it that way. You really think that I'm being extreme here? And then ask them furthermore, what is the non-extreme? What's the middle ground? What's the middle way to do this? Okay, make them prove the point. Don't, don't try to prove the negative. Don't let them put you on the defensive. They're the ones that have to prove. They're the ones that have to explain. And then let's say they make a halfway decent argument. Then you can say, you know what? I really hadn't thought of it that way. I'll think about it, and we'll see maybe next time. Have a nice day, and walk away. And this way, you're not on defensive, because every time somebody puts you on defensive, it's irritating, it's annoying, and sooner or later you're going to get to the point where you're going to snap at somebody. You're going to do something you may regret, not in a major or dramatic way necessarily, but you're going to walk away thinking, God, I could have handled that better. And the way to handle it better, put them on the spot. Don't let them put you on the spot. You put them on the spot. Extreme, what do you mean? What are you talking about? What does that mean? Or, like I said, you say, I hadn't thought about it. Explain to me how what I'm doing is extreme. Okay. And then with their isn't allowing him to go when he has chores to do the other extreme? And if that's extreme and my way is extreme, what's in the middle? And by the time you get through all that stuff, they usually give up. They're going to say, you know what? Never mind. Okay, thanks. Have a nice day. And you get out of this nice and smooth. You get out of this without ruffling people's feathers. And the bonus is they're going to think to themselves. They're going to wonder, why am I doing this? Why am I sticking my nose in this person's business? It's not getting me anywhere. I'm not winning here. So, back in a minute. Thank you. So now I finished with the book by Tales from My Bicentennial Year, and I found it to be, I liked it. It's poignant. It's conservative. It's an example of conservatism, living a conservative lifestyle, and So having a family, you grow up in a family. The family sticks together. Everybody goes to church. Everybody has their roles to play, and it's a good example of conservatism. It's a slice of Americana. All the lingo, the losers walk, and all that kind of thing. The games that they used to play that I remember playing, and I didn't live in New York. I lived on the other coast, and so it was a nice slice of Americana. I wish the book had been edited better. It was fairly well written, but it could use probably at least one more time through the editing. The way that it was written, it was a little bit awkward in places, and there was a lot of typos and whatnot that made it very difficult to read. So it could have been done better that way, but it was very poignant and very. I got emotionally caught up in the story. So now a new story that I'm going to be reading, and it's from Louis L'Amour, and he's a Western writer, and the book is called Hondo, and it's a strong central character. I love stories with strong central characters. I like movies that are that way, and I like to read books that are also about strong central characters. So this is, I'm going to read the foreword and then at least half of, maybe I'll do the whole first chapter, but at least half of chapter 1. But this is the foreword. What do we have here? The story of a lonely man hiding his loneliness behind a cloak of independence. A man as bleak as the land over which he rode, yet beneath the harshness and the necessary violence, a kind man, a just man, a man who had come to terms with the land in which he lived. We have a woman with a home, no matter how thin the walls, how lonely the prospect. For her, there were no ribbons and lace, no waltzes in the moonlight, no gossip over tea, no shopping in the store, only the sunrises and sunsets, a land of changing colors and cloud shadows, long nights lying awake and alone when any sound might mean the end for her son and herself. But a woman with a home, a woman with a will to persist, to endure. And we have an Apache leading his warriors in raids upon the white man, an Apache whose respected courage and respected strength because they were qualities his people needed to survive. He was no poor, pathetic red man being put upon by whites, but a fierce warrior, a veteran of many battles, asking favors of no man. He did not fear the pony soldiers, but welcomed them. For they brought into the harsh land the horses, the food, the clothing, and the weapons he could take from them. Often he admired the men he killed. Often he was contemptuous of their ignorance and lack of skills. Also, we have a boy who had a mother but needed a man to show him how to become a man himself. His own father was but a shadowy figure who came smelling of whiskey and the cheap perfume of other women, who came and went leaving no tracks that the boy could read. A boy who would build tomorrow. A boy who was the future. I sing of arms and men, not of presidents, kings, generals, or passing explorers, but of those who survived their personal lonely Alamos, men who drove the cattle, plowed the furrows, built their shelters against the wind, the men who built a nation. I do not need to go to Thermopylae or the plains of Marathon for heroism. I find it here on the frontier. I found it at adobe walls at Beecher's Island and in the aged Indian who charged the cavalry alone with a worn-out knife. I found it in the Cheyenne warrior Mouse Road, whose enemies, when all his companions had been killed, drew off and told him he was too brave to kill, that he could go. Mouse Road told him, "My brothers lie dead around me. How can I go back to my village and say they are dead, but I am alive? You must kill me too." And 3 more enemies fell before he was killed. Did Demosthenes or Cicero ever speak with greater eloquence than Chief Joseph when he said, "It is cold and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food, and no one knows where they are. I want time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I shall fight no more, forever." These are the American stories, the stories I wish to tell, and if I have not told them well, I shall have tried. December 1982. And this is a story that takes place in Arizona. Chapter 1. He rolled the cigarette in his lips, liking the taste of the tobacco, squinting his eyes against the sun glare. His buckskin shirt, seasoned by sun, rain, and sweat, smelled stale and old. His jeans had long since faded to a neutral color that lost itself against the desert. He was a big man, wide-shouldered, with the lean, hard-boned face of the desert rider. There's no softness in him. His toughness was ingrained and deep, without cruelty, yet quick, hard, and dangerous. Whatever wells of gentleness might lie within him were guarded and deep. An hour passed, and there was no more dust, so he knew he was in trouble. He had drawn up short of the crest, where his eyes could just see over the ridge. His horse crowded against a dark clump of juniper, where he was invisible to any eye not in the immediate vicinity. The day was still and hot. Sweat trickled down his cheeks and down his body under the shirt. Dust meant a dust devil or riders, and this had been no dust devil. The dust had shown itself, continued briefly, then vanished, and that meant that he also had been seen. If they were white men fearful of attack, they were now holed up in some arroyo. If they were Apaches, they would be trying to close in. He studied the terrain with care, a searching study that began in the far distance and worked nearer and nearer, missing no rock, no clump of brush, no upthrust ledge. He saw no further dust, heard no sound, detected no movement. He did not move. Patience at such a time was more than a virtue. It was the price of survival. Often the first to move was the first to die. Hondo Lane took out the makings and built another cigarette. When he struck the match, he held it well back in the foliage of the juniper, keeping the flare invisible. He drew deep on the cigarette, returning his attention to the terrain. The rough-looking mongrel dog that followed him had lowered himself into the soft earth beneath another juniper a dozen yards away. The dog was a big brute, gaunt from running. It was hot. A few lost cotton ball bunches of cloud drifted in a brassy sky, leaving rare islands of shadow upon the desert's face. Nothing moved. It was a far, lost land, a land of beige-gray silences and distance where the eye reached out farther and farther to lose itself finally against the sky, and where the only movement was the lazy swing of a remote buzzard. His eyes wandered along the ridge. To his right there was a shallow saddle, the logical place to cross a ridge to avoid being skylined. Logical, but obvious. It was the place an Apache would watch. There were junipers beyond the ridge and broken boulders upon the ridge itself. In less than a minute, he could cross the ridge and be in the shelter of those junipers. And if he took his time and made no sudden moves to attract the eye, he might easily cross the ridge without being seen. He thought none of this. Rather, it was something he knew, something born of years in wild country. Hondo Lane crossed the ridge into the junipers and hesitated briefly, studying the country. His every instinct told him these riders had been Apaches, and that they were somewhere close by. Yet the dog had given no sign. He eased his weight in the saddle and checked the eagerness of the horse, which smelled the water in the river not far ahead. Finishing his cigarette, he pinched it out and dropped it into the sand and angled down the slope. He slid his Winchester from its scabbard and rode with it across the saddle, keeping his horse to a walk. Vitero was off the reservation with his fighting men, and that could mean anything. Council fires burned, and there was much coming and going among the lodges. Mescaleros had been hunting with the Membrienos, and the border country was alive with rumors. Hondo Lane could smell trouble, and he knew it was coming, for others and for himself. Ahead lay the river, and after the rains it would be running full, and part of the crossing would be swimming. Lane liked no part of it. Since the rains, he had crossed the trails of 4 bands of Apaches, and they'd been riding without their women and children, which meant raiding. Young bucks out to lift some hair or steal horses. He went down the slope to the river, knowing there was no way of avoiding the crossing. He used every bit of cover and changed direction frequently, heading toward an inviting sandbar that led far out into the stream, yet when he was near it, he suddenly switched directions and rode behind a clump of cottonwood and willow, going into the water in the shallow of the trees, and quietly, to make no splash. The dog went along with him, and together they crossed. As the buckskin went up the bank, Hondo heard the twang of a bowstring and felt the buckskin bunch its muscles under the impact of the arrow. As the horse started to fall, Hondo Lane rolled free. He hit the sand on his shoulder and rolled swiftly behind a draft log. When he stopped rolling, he was looking past the butt end of the log with his rifle in position. He saw a movement of brown, and his finger tightened, and the rifle leapt in his hands. He heard the whop of the striking bullet and saw the Apache roll over, eyes wide to the sun. As he fired, he moved, getting into a new position in coarse grass with almost no cover. And then he waited. Hondo dried his sweaty palms on the shirt front and blinked to keep the sweat out of his eyes. The sand was hot beneath him, the sun hot upon his back. He smelled the stale sweat of his body, the smells of tobacco, horse, and greasewood smoke that lived with him. He waited, and there was no sound. A fly lighted on the back of his hand. He heard the sound of water running over stones. Around him there were gray bones of a long-dead tree. His shoulder cramped. But there was no movement, only a small bird started to land in a clump of brush, then veered away. It was a small bunch of brush, and Hondo took a chance. He fired suddenly into the brush, spacing his shots. He heard a faint, gasping cry and fired again at the same spot. Rolling back to his former position, he waited, then looked past the butt of the log. He saw a moccasin toe dig spasmodically into the sand. Then he saw it slowly relax. 2 Indians or more. He lay still, ears alert to sound. The moccasin toe remained as it was. A tiny lizard appeared on a branch near him and stared wide-eyed. Its tiny heart pounded, its mouth gaped wide with heat. He tried a palm, then flicked a stone into the brush 20 feet away. He heard it fall, and no sound followed. Probably not more than 2. His mouth felt dry, and he dearly wanted a drink. Yet he waited, wanting to take no chance, and knowing too well the patience of the Apache. Only after several minutes did he ease away from the log and circle to get a better look. The Apache lay still, his lower back bathed in blood that glistened redly in the hot afternoon sun. Hondo Lane got to his feet and moved closer. The bullet had struck the Indian in the chest. It had cut through his body from the top of his chest and come out in the small of his back, breaking his spine. Lowering the butt of his rifle, Hondo took off his hat and mopped his brow with a handkerchief. He looked again at the sprawled brown body of the Indian, then glanced over at the other. Both are dead, and this was not a good place to be. The dog stopped under a tree and lowered himself to the ground, watching him. Hondo glanced at his dead horse, then stripped it of saddle, bridle, and saddlebags. It was a load, but swinging them together, he shouldered them and started off through the trees, walking with a steady stride. The dog rose from the ground in one easy movement and started after him. Reaching the stream at a bend, Hondo Lane walked into the water on an angle that pointed upstream. When he was knee-deep, he turned and walked back downstream and stayed with the stream for half a mile, then emerged and kept to rocks along the stream for some distance farther, leaving them finally at a rock ledge. When he left the rock, he was again walking upstream. He used every device to hide his trail, changing direction with the skill of an Apache, and finally he reached a ridge, which he followed, just below the crest. The sun sank, and the long shadows crept out from the hills, but Hondo Lane did not rest. He moved on, checking distance by the stars, and continuing along the ridge. When he had walked 2 hours into the night, he finally lowered his heavy burden to the ground and rubbed his shoulder. He had come to a halt in a tiny circle of rocks among scattered pinyons. The rocks rimmed a cup that sat down at least 10 feet lower than the hills around. Unrolling his blankets beneath a tree, he made a quick supper of a piece of hardtack and jerked beef. Then he rolled in his blanket and slept. At dawn, he was awake. He did not awaken gradually, but his eyes opened quickly to consciousness, and he listened, then glanced at the dog. He lay some yards away, head resting on paws. Hondo relaxed and swiftly rolled his blankets. After a quick check from the edge of the cup, studying the country, he returned and gathered dry branches from the curl leaf, a shrub whose branches give off a hot flame and are almost smokeless. He built a small fire under a pinyon so what little smoke there was would be diffused by rising through the branches. He made coffee, ate more jerky and hardtack, then eliminated all evidence of his fire and brushed leaves and sand over the spot. Carefully, he removed evidence of his resting place and tracks. Then, shouldering his saddle and saddlebags again, he left the cup and started along the ridge. The morning air was fresh and cool. He walked with a steady stride, rarely pausing to rest. His lean, wolf-hard body, baked by too many suns and dried by winds, carried no soft flesh to melt away under the sun. At mid-morning, he heard birds chirping and went toward the sound. A shallow basin in a rock held water. He dropped to his belly and drank, then moved back, and the dog moved in, lapping the water gratefully, but with eyes wary. Among the rocks near the water, Hondo Lane smoked a cigarette and studied the country. There was no movement, but an occasional buzzard. Once he saw a lone coyote. He drank again, then shouldered his saddle and moved on. Once he stopped abruptly. He had found the old track of a shod horse. The track was days old, and from its appearance had been made before the rain. Little was left but the indentations. Thoughtfully, he studied the terrain around him. It was an extremely unlikely place for a rider to be. No soldier would be in such a place unless scouting for a larger command. Shouldering his burden once more, Hondo backtrailed the hoof marks, finding 2 more tracks, then losing them on lower ground where the rain had washed them out. Finally, making a guess, he quartered on his route and cut across the shallow valley, moving toward a place of vantage from which he could see the country. He saw a bunch of squaw cabbage and broke off a few stalks and walked on, eating them as he went. Twice more he found isolated tracks of that same shod horse, and then suddenly the dog stiffened. Hondo eased himself back to the ground. There was sparse grass where he lay, a few scattered chunks of rock. He lowered his saddle among the rocks and lay perfectly still. The dog, a few yards away, lay absolutely immobile. He growled low and deep. "Sam!" Hondo's whisper was quick, commanding. The growl subsided. Several minutes he lay still, then he heard the movement. There were 9 Apaches, riding in a loose bunch, heading in a direction roughly parallel to his own. He lay still, avoiding looking directly at them for fear of attracting their attention. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, and reminding you to listen to the John and Ken Show on KFI AM 640, Monday through Friday from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Also, KFI needs to bring back Brian Suits and his show, The Dark Secret Place. Hashtag bring back Brian Suits. Until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.